Accounting for allotments. Allotments are internal allocations of funds on a periodic basis. For example, month to month or quarter to quarter. We use allotments to regulate and control the use of appropriations. It's kind of like putting yourself or your family on a budget. These allotments, the dollar amounts, are typically agreed upon allocation amounts. The agreements are between the department heads and the government's administration. And on a periodic basis, there will be some journal entries done, and the allotments will be available for use. They may be formally recorded, and what we need to do when we put the budget in, we would credit unallotted appropriations instead of crediting appropriations. So they're unallotted until we allot them periodically. Alright, so credit unallotted appropriations instead of appropriations. And then when we do periodically allot it, we will debit that account, unallotted appropriations, taking some of it, and then credit allotments. And if there are subsidiary ledgers for the types of allotments, then of course those are going to need to get those entries. In regards to additional comments that I wanted to leave you guys with, I'm going to roll back several slides. I'm hoping you guys have been using these for note-taking purposes. A thing that I wanted to mention here about the use of this BFB account, I want you to keep in mind that when we are debiting and crediting our estimated revenues and our appropriations and things like that, that many times the amounts of our estimated inflows, whether it's revenues or other financing sources, and our amounts credited to appropriations and other financing uses are not always going to be equal. Alright, many times the budgetary fund balance may actually end up getting increased with a credit due to extra inflows, or possibly getting decreased because we are having to use more of it in order to fund our appropriations and our other financing uses. So I'm hoping that you understand what I mean by the term plug. Alright, budgetary fund balance sometimes has a number that gets plugged into it when all the other entries that go along with using it don't equal exactly. Okay, so again, draw your T accounts, type up or write out what your general ledger entries need to be as far as these budgetary accounts, and you may have to calculate a debit or a credit amount to plug in, and it would go to the budgetary fund balance. Okay, keep that in mind. Again, when you go about recording the budget, keep in mind you've got journal entries that need to be done to the budgetary accounts, and then you've got subsidiary ledgers underneath those accounts based on classifications. Okay, so you've got a revenues ledger that supports the operating accounts, and you've got estimated revenue ledgers that supports the budgetary account for estimated revenues. Same goes with the other financing sources and estimated other financing sources. They have their subsidiary ledgers that go with them. And then when you're recording those appropriations, and then later encumbrances, and finally expenditures. There are subsidiary ledgers for those. So you'll have multiple lines getting debited and credited as you move the numbers along. Moving through my notes here. In regards to our budgetary control of expenditures and our encumbrances, again, it's really important that you guys try to read the chapters. I'm doing my best to try to break down major details for you and making these PowerPoints with very specific things on them in hopes to help you break down the process of what's occurring. But I want you to make sure that you understand that when we do these encumbrances, we do them for the things where we're issuing purchase orders and contracts and things like that, but we don't necessarily do this debit to encumbrances and credit to encumbrances outstanding for things that are being incurred on an ongoing basis. Example given, salaries and wages for the employees of the government. We pretty much, have a grip on how all that works. It's going to be annual salary amounts, or it's going to be regular wages being earned throughout the period. And if those are fairly even across the entire fiscal year, we don't need to take the time and energy to do this encumbrances process, since it is kind of cumbersome. Now, if our government happens to have some very seasonal stuff going on, and we may need that for reviewing our sources of cash and whether we've got available, etc., we might need to do it. But for our regular run-of-the-mill utilities and things like that, we typically don't go through here and do encumbrances. Also, in regards to when I showed you this formula, keep in mind that what we're saying here, when we've got a positive result, the amount that's left over here can be referred to positive amounts only, not this overspent deal, but the positive amount, unencumbered, unexpended appropriations. And so think about what that phrase means. It's our available balance. It's unencumbered, it's unexpended, it's still available if we have that positive result there. One other thing about this particular formula and how these items would look on our financials and our reports, some jurisdictions may actually require that all of these specific categories right here may actually need to be broken down into those more specific details, those classifications of the kinds of appropriations, the kind of expenditures, the kind of encumbrances. In regards to revising our budget, one additional note there, that if amendments are necessary, then again those journal entries would be needed to be entered in order to reflect what those amendments are. And keep in mind, again, the use of that BFB account. Are we having to dip into the budgetary fund balance when we enter those adjusting entries as far as the amendment goes? Or are we adding back to or increasing the budgetary fund balance? So keep in mind, when you're revising the budget, you may have to use that VFB, and it's going to be your plug amount. Do you need to debit it or do you need to credit it based on the other things that you are having to amend with journal entries? Same thing holds true here on the closing entries. Keep in mind that when you do those closing entries and you are reversing out all the original budgetary entries, when the budget was originally recorded. You may also have amended that budget at some juncture, and if it was amended, then those amending entries would also need to be reversed out. I did put this note in here for you. I didn't cover the slide in the earlier video, but I have typed it out for you. Hopefully you guys noticed that I have highlighted the words temporary accounts from the budgetary accounts are closed to their respective fund balance. What I've highlighted in red is what we have focused on. We have not dealt with closing the operating statement accounts yet. We will deal with that in our future chapters. Keep in mind what you're doing is closing the books at the end of a period. That kind of stuff was covered early for you guys in Principles of Accounting 1. Hopefully you've seen some more closing of the books in your intermediate classes. So we'll close out those operating statement accounts later, but for now we've only talked about closing out the budgetary accounts, and we have mentioned that we've got that budgetary fund balance that we also will use and close things out.